Hello, everyone. Joe here. Welcome back to Code and Create. Exciting episode we've got today. Something we've not really done before, so we're looking forward to this. We're going to be looking at user experience for aspiring designers, aspiring being the key word there. And we really couldn't have anyone better to talk us through this today than Ashley Janelle. Hi, Ashley. How are you?
Hi, how you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you for joining us. And where are you? Let everyone know where you are at the moment, out in the States.
Yeah, I'm in Chicago. Thank
Chicago.
you. Yeah,
It's very early there, then I assume.
it's very early here, yes, but glad to be here and talking to your audience. So thank you again.
Yeah, definitely. It's really good to have you. So yeah, just to I guess quickly run through what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be looking at sort of understanding what a UX designer does, I guess, overall, typical responsibilities they may have, what makes a winning portfolio, interview tips, what to do, what not to do, and obviously some tips on what aspiring designers can typically do when getting into UX or trying to land that first UX role, right?
Absolutely.
Cool.
So, yep.
Yeah, so I mean, tell us a bit about yourself and actually your background, and your sort of mission, I guess, to help aspiring designers get into UX.
Yeah, so thank you so much for having me. So I am a UX UI designer. I graduated from Columbia College Chicago, which is an art school. It's an art college with a background in interactive arts and media, which is basically a lot of web design, a lot of graphic design, some coding. But what I found was, at least when I was in school, UX wasn't really talked about, like the how behind or the why behind exactly what we do was not really talked about. It was more the front facing, how things look. And so I was on a mission to find something that I felt was a little bit more meaningful. And so that led me to UX, and now working, which I'll kind of get into later, but at Caterpillar as a UX UI designer, and also outside of that, helping aspiring UX designers find their path and their footing, and also learn UX as well.
Cool. So yeah, I gave a brief overview, I guess, in terms of what we're going to cover. Did I get most points there? I mean, do you want to give us a quick overview again of exactly what we're looking to achieve, I guess, and what information people can look to get out of the next sort of 55 minutes to an hour?
Yeah, definitely. So if you are someone who has a dream or a goal of becoming a UX designer, but you're not sure where to start, this is definitely for you. If you are someone who has maybe started applying, but you haven't gotten any feedback, or you haven't gotten any calls back on your application, we're going to talk about why that might be. And we'll also talk about, just some things that you can do to continue on that path. So again, if you are someone who is looking to get into the field, or someone who might be a little bit, further than that, and you've actually started applying, this is definitely for you.
Cool. Sounds good, exciting. So just before we start then, Ashley, and kick off, just want to touch on a few points. So if you're watching on Crowdcast, guys, you'll notice there's a few polls down below, which you should be able to see at the bottom of your screen, somewhere around there. And just get involved, just a bit of fun. It's just good to see sort of what stage you're at in your career. And where we'll be talking about portfolios later on, just to see if you do have a portfolio and what sort of what angle you've gone with that, the website, PDF, Behance. If it is not on there, then let us know in the chat bar. If you're watching on LinkedIn Live, I know a lot of you are, then please do keep putting your questions in the comments. We'll keep an eye on that, and we'll try and get around to asking Ashley all of your questions at the end. And obviously, if you're on Crowdcast, then there's also an Ask a Question tab at the bottom. So yeah, get your questions in for Ashley. We'll try and get round to them at the end, and we'll go from there. I'm sorry about that if you heard my phone ringing then. Yeah, cool. So Ashley, should we get started? Do you want to? You've got a presentation that we're going to go through, yeah?
Yep, definitely. Share my
Cool.
screen.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me know when you can
There
see.
we go.
Awesome. Okay, so again, thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here to talk to your audience. Again, like I mentioned, if you are an aspiring UX designer or someone who is just looking for more information on how to get into the field, or if you are someone who's been applying but haven't really heard anything back, this is definitely for you. Like I mentioned, I'm Ashley Janelle, UX UI designer at Caterpillar. Also the creator of Learn UX Online in 16 Weeks, which is the online course that takes you from beginner to experienced. And we'll talk about that a little later as well. But everyone always sees these job postings and they're like, well, how do I get experience if no one will hire me? We do that in the course. Experience, I talk about experience being practice as well, and the practice that you can get actually building up your portfolio and working on projects. Like I mentioned, I went to Columbia College Chicago, have a bachelor's in interactive arts and media, and from there did some additional UX education after working for several design agencies and various companies like Redbox and Motorola Solution, doing a lot of visual design work. So in conjunction with that, like I mentioned, also I do a lot of coaching, teaching, and mentoring, really around the high school STEM education area, really helping STEM students find a passion in STEM and really helping them grow in those areas, as well as the coaching that I mentioned in the 16-week program. So the things that I am talking to you guys about today are not things that I necessarily, I'm not just pulling from things that I remember when I was, maybe in your position, but I actually work with people daily who are in your position, aspiring designers. And so they keep me current, they keep me relevant, and they keep me up on, exactly what's actually going on and happening in the industry today in terms of landing a job and what it takes and exactly what employers are looking for. So when I talk about aspiring, I always have my own definitions for it. But for me, aspiring UX designer is directing one's hope in the direction of becoming a successful UX designer. So whenever I talk about, your journey to becoming a UI designer or a UX designer, we want to make sure that we add in successful in there. We don't want to just be average. We want to make sure that we are getting the training that we need, the education that we need, the practice that we need so that we are successful when we are in those roles. And an example of that would be just setting aside a few hours each day to research the UX field and work on projects. And this is really, really important. If you are an aspiring UX designer, if you are learning how to do anything, you want to make sure that you are working at that craft daily. This is not something that you can kind of pick up and put down. I have seen that happen to people, and it really ends up kind of eating away at your motivation and also your belief in yourself that you can do it. It's kind of like riding a bike. You have to practice it, and you have to set aside time every day to make sure that you are sharpening those skills, that you're reading up on, your materials, that you are, reading books, listening to podcasts in conjunction with actually practicing, various methodologies and what have you, for, projects and actually working on projects that will go into your portfolio. So this is, aspiring, when I talk about aspiring UX designers, these are people that are doing it. And we have to make sure that we are doing it and we're doing it every day, something that will ultimately push us towards our goal.
Yeah, I guess if you want to be successful in anything, it takes hard work, and UX is no different, right?
Absolutely. And, like I mentioned, I work with a lot of aspiring UX designers every day in my course, and the ones that are successful are the ones that are setting aside time each day. It is muscle memory. A lot of these, when we talk about research methodologies, or whether we're talking about, trying to become a better UI designer or better visual designer, it all takes practice. And so that is the mindset that I want to at least start with, is that if you are someone who is trying to break into this field, know that you are going to have to set aside time each day. And that is only going to push you closer to your ultimate goal.
Yeah, cool.
So if this is you, the aspiring UX designer, you are in the right place. So let's talk about exactly what a UX designer actually does, because I know that, if you're working on projects or if you're kind of listening to podcasts or however it is that you're kind of prepping yourself to learn more about this field, it really doesn't beat someone actually telling you what they do on an actual day-to-day basis. So I'll go into a little bit of my typical day and what it looks like.
Just before you go through that,
Yeah.
Ashley, sorry, I was just going to ask, when you, obviously I know you involved in a lot of these mentor programs and people that are looking to get in design, is it surprising how many people don't actually know what UX is fundamentally? They just have an idea of what it is and it's not necessarily completely remotely close to it at all.
Yeah, so I do think that once people learn more about UX, what I learn is that, or what I find is that people are more intrigued.
Yeah.
But UX is not about just creating pretty pictures, or about just talking to people all day. It's really a skill. There's several skills that go into becoming a UX designer. It's very technical.
Yeah.
And yeah, definitely. I definitely find that sometimes there are some misconceptions, and just, people may not necessarily have the knowledge of exactly what we do.
I will keep on interrupting you, by the way, as we go through, just asking different questions.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So one of the first things that I do is I take a look at something called requirements. So when we do this is basically understanding the scope of work of a project. So a project for someone like myself who works at a company can look like a large project, like maybe we're working on a new platform, but typically those projects are broken down into what we call features. So a feature can be something like a search component. So maybe we need a global search component for when users come in and they can search the entire platform. Or maybe a feature could be a way for our users to actually leave comments and talk to other people who use machinery. I work in the construction industry. And each of those features, if you think of just like a basic website, every component, everything that you see on that makes up that page is a feature. It's a feature of that page. And so each of those features has something called a scope of work, which is basically a written understanding of what it does and how it's supposed to function. And so when I read these requirements, basically what I'm doing is trying to understand exactly what needs to happen, and ask any questions that I need to before actually going and designing.
Yeah.
Excuse me. So now we get into kind of the design part. So this is where I typically will work with people called product owners and business analysts. And if you haven't heard of any of these roles, I would really implore you guys to take some notes and just at least familiarize yourself with what product owners and business analysts do, because it's possible that you could be working with these people as well. So basically what I do is I work with them to ensure that all of the features are designed in a way that's intended. So in between the requirements and actual design phase, we're doing things like mapping. That's before actually designing anything. And mapping is basically where we actually go and actually kind of draw out, okay, what is this actually supposed to look like from a really high level? What is the user actually doing? What are all the touch points? If there's any research that we need to do, sometimes we've already done it beforehand. Sometimes we will do it kind of in between requirements and design. And, before we actually design something. We also want to also use this time to get feedback from the actual design UX UI team. So obviously we have our product owners and we have our business analysts, and we have various people in different roles. But then we actually have our design team where we're all designers, and we give feedback on each other's work, which is also really, really important. It keeps us consistent. It keeps us kind of in tune with what everyone else is working on and doing, just to make sure that we don't have any holes in our projects. Then the designs, if you will, really move off into the development stage. And this is where the developers take it on, and they're actually starting to actually develop the features. Kind of the features are really kind of batched together, and then they go. We hand off things kind of in buckets. But during this time, what UX designers are doing is we're typically moving on to other projects or other feature designs, or we're also revisiting previous designs and tweaking those. So maybe we've gotten some feedback and we want to go back and tweak those. And we're also during this time meeting with the developers to make sure that they understand what it is that we're handing off, what the feature is supposed to do, and how it works and things like that.
So communication really is pretty important, I guess, especially from dealing with the product owners, the BAs, obviously the development team as well. So that's got to be massively important.
Absolutely, and there are a ton of meetings that happen during that handoff process, even as you see here during the testing process. But there's also certain ways that we document actually in our design files, and there's documentation everywhere. So there's the scope of work, which is typically like the epic that's written. There's documentation there. There's documentation in the features, which is actually each, line for line, what's supposed to happen, how the user actually interacts with the feature. And then we also, as designers, document things from a visual standpoint. So, when the search bar is clicked, what happens? Does it expand to the right? Does it change colors? Does it, is it bold? What happens? And so there's documentation on all sides, and the developers have to understand all of that. And so there's a ton of communication. There are, a ton of meetings that happen up front and also kind of along the way. And so the next thing that happens is there's a testing phase. And this is a development testing phase. So we are not so much involved in this, but during this time, again, designers, for me, are continuing to work on other features, other epics, and revisiting work that needs to be tweaked. If we need to be pulled in to work with the developers, answer any questions, we definitely do that. But this is kind of our time to kind of move on to other things.
Yeah.
And then we have the deploy and review phase. And this is basically where we, as the designers, actually go into the environment. So to the QA or, the website platform that has been developed, any new pages or new features, and we actually take a look at that. We take notes of any inconsistencies. We have meetings with the development teams to report these inconsistencies and bugs. And that's kind of an ongoing process. And so in a nutshell, this is a snapshot of a typical day of a UX designer, a UX UI designer, which is what I do, kind of the thought and the process behind things, and also the visual design.
Yeah, cool. Awesome.
So it's not just, this is kind of it put into more of a formality, right? So all of the things that you learn in a UX course, or all of the things that you kind of read about when it comes to design and how things work, this is all of that, but this is put into kind of a formal process.
Yeah, exactly. It's not just coloring in boxes.
Yes, exactly. This is how all of that, actually, and notice I really, except for the design portion, I really didn't talk about the actual UX part, right? Like,
I know,
yeah, this is, it's a lot more formal. And again, like I said, it's very, very technical.
Yeah.
So now we're going to get into portfolios. And again, Joe, stop me at any time, but this is, I always talk about portfolios being the bread and butter of your application. When we receive portfolios, when any portfolio comes across my desk or application or what have you, resume, portfolio, I always look at the portfolio first. Not to say that your resume isn't important, because it is, right? You have to have one, but the portfolio pretty much shows me everything that I need to know about you, what kind of designer you are, what your interests are, and if your style and if your ability to present your work aligns with what it is that we might be looking for in our team. So before I even get to your resume, I'm looking at your portfolio. So you want to really make sure that as a UX designer, your portfolio is also user-friendly. It's engaging. It is something that is going to pull me in and something that is going to be easy for me to follow, because portfolios definitely tend to be lengthy. They're very meaty, as they have to be, but you want to make sure that even with all of that, all of the components that go into a portfolio, reverse engineer that process and really make sure that your portfolio is something that you would want to read.
Yeah.
Make sure that it's something that is easy for you to digest, or your mom to digest, or your grandmother to digest. It should not be super, super technical and so detailed that, I want to stop reading. So definitely think about that.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you there, Ashley. I guess from seeing online, LinkedIn sometimes, or most of the time, should I say, you see these aspiring designers, and they're like, what do I put in my portfolio? I'm sure you're going to touch on that anyway, but if they haven't sort of had any of that commercial experience, and they're I guess at a dead end in terms of what they can actually put into it.
Absolutely.
So obviously, it's obviously quite a huge important point for any aspiring designer to get their portfolio right. I think first and foremost, if they are looking to land that first UX role.
Absolutely. And that's what I kind of stop here before we actually even get into, like you mentioned, like the important part of what's in it, and just kind of set the stage that, make sure that your portfolio is, I always say engaging, easy to follow, and something that is visually pleasing. So let's go ahead and get into it.
Cool.
So I refer to portfolios as winning. You don't want anything less than a winning portfolio. Winning means that you get, the attention of the hiring manager, the attention of the design team, and it pulls them in and pulls you in to get an interview and ultimately get the job, right? So what is a winning portfolio, and why do you need one? So a UX portfolio, as a lot of you are probably aware of, it's a compilation of all of the work that you've done. It usually contains detailed case studies of UX design projects. And these projects demonstrate your skill and your approach. So if you had a project, what it should basically, if you think about, like if we go back to like science class or math class where we had to show our work, there was a problem, and the problem was, a small problem, right? But the answer was long because you had to show your work, right? So you can't just submit the answer because that would be considered half a point or whatever. You had to show your work. And that is the same thing with a UX portfolio. So you have to start with the problem. What was the problem? And usually we do that with something called a problem statement. And that is the beginning, kind of, where did this project come from? What was what were you trying to solve for? And then all the way at the bottom is typically where you will kind of unveil the final project, whether that was a UI or whatever that was. But in the middle of all of that, you have to show how you got there. And that's really the important part.
Yeah, exactly. I've seen several and quite experienced designers as well, portfolios where they're just showing visuals of sort of landing page, the final landing page, with no sort of explanation of the journey on how they got there. So I completely agree with what you're saying in terms of showing that process.
Definitely. And I would consider those portfolios more visual design portfolios. Well, so you're positioning yourself as a UX designer. And like I mentioned before, right, like UX is not about pretty pictures. It, nowhere in the previous slide where I kind of showed like a detailed rundown of what I do every day, did I really talk about pretty pictures, right? Like there is process that goes into exactly how you got there. And there are various techniques that have to be shown. There are various research methodologies that have to be shown. And so anything that's just visual to me, that, that indicates that you're a visual designer. So if you do want to go out for that UX role, you have to show the process that happened in between there.
Yeah.
And like I mentioned, employers they use your portfolio to really understand your skills. So one thing that I always try to remind my students is, in my course, you will learn UX kind of by the book, right? And there are research methodologies that we do, and we do several of them. There are ways that we pull out. We have methodologies for pulling out certain insights from that research. From there, we talk about mapping techniques. We talk about how to sketch, what that looks like, how to transfer those sketches to digital design. We talk about a slew of things. And what I always have to remind them is that even if you feel like, well, that sketch, it didn't mean anything, or it's not worth going in my portfolio, or, that mapping, I didn't like the way that it was done. We'll go back and kind of revisit that, because what you don't want to do is leave anything on the table. When I look at your portfolio, or any hiring manager looks at your portfolio, and you don't have something in there, I only know that you know what you show me. So make sure that everything that you do, you put into your portfolio. Even if you think it wasn't that good, well, then go back and figure out, well, why don't you feel like this was a strong artifact to use? Because if I see no mapping in your portfolio, or even in one project, I'm gonna wonder, well, how did you get from point A to point B?
Yes.
Yeah. So always remember that, whatever you do, even if, maybe you go out for a walk, and maybe you're doing a project on the environment, and you go out for a walk and you are getting inspiration from just what's around you. Maybe you walk into a city and you see how, people are treating the environment. And maybe you go out into the country and you see how people are, and maybe you're documenting that with photos. Add those photos, right? Like, show the process, show your unique process. Don't leave anything on the table. And then also, designers often use this opportunity to allow their personalities to shine through their websites or their portfolios by adding things like landing pages, about me pages, and personal branding. And this is definitely something that I know I say oftentimes, but you really want to be thinking about your own personal brand. What your style is. That a lot of times shines through your design work. But take your landing page, or maybe the header of your landing page, and use that as an opportunity to get creative. Get creative with your about me page in any way that you can kind of show that you have, an interest beyond the work. I would definitely do so. Even if that's, your LinkedIn banner, maybe you're an illustrator, or maybe you're not an illustrator, but maybe you, maybe you really care about your personal branding. Make sure it all ties together. And that at every touch point, if a hiring manager looks at your portfolio, then they go to your LinkedIn, then they go to your resume. If they all are kind of cohesive, and there's a look and feel, and there's a brand, and you're using the same fonts and whatnot, like, really take those things into consideration, because those are the details that are going to stick out to someone like me, who's a designer, and picks up the details.
Yeah, that's very good advice, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Just something to think about. It's beyond the work that you do.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, like they always say, like, it's like the devil is in the detail. The devil is in the details, or something like that. Like it's the details. The small things that you think people maybe aren't paying attention to.
Exactly.
Okay, so where can this go wrong? So on one side, I have some artifacts that I was talking about. So the first thing that you see is a persona. And this is one of the methodologies that we do, where we basically show, what a user looks like. And this is a compilation of users. Maybe we talk to 10 people, and we're going to show two or three personas, which is basically like a visual representation of some of the people that we talk to, right? So it's really easy for, say, me as the reader, someone who didn't go through this process with you, to look at something visual and say, okay, I understand the people that you talk to. They shopped at these places, they're around this age, they have these interests, these goals, these needs, etc. Those are things that you want to make sure you include into your portfolio. Things like storyboarding are things that you want to include in your portfolio. So like I mentioned, where can this go wrong? When portfolios don't clearly present your work well and showcase the skills that are working against you as you apply for roles. So like I mentioned, if you are leaving things on the table, if you're not including things, if things do not clearly present your work, I would say this is a pretty clear storyboard. This is a pretty clear persona. You really want to make sure that all of the design that you, or all of the artifacts that you put into your portfolio are clear. You want to make sure that they are visually pleasing. Again, like I mentioned, a few key areas to focus on is, you really want to understand the problem. And by reading your portfolio, I know if you had a really good understanding of what the problem was, or if you kind of just wrote something down. Right.
Yeah.
So there are ways that you can say, show what the problem was, maybe using a problem statement, maybe supporting quotes from users who are maybe having issues currently. Maybe there's a current platform, or maybe they're just having issues and you're trying to find a way to solve their issues. You want to.
I guess it's important
Yeah.
as well. Sorry. I guess it's important as well to show exactly what your part of that was. So if you was part of a wider team, you're not just putting in what everyone's been doing. It's important, I guess, to show exactly what your part in that was.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you pointed that out. So the first thing that you want to do with that is you want to disclose in the beginning of the project that, it's like, hey, worked on this project for X amount of time, worked on this, there were 4 people on this project, and my role in this project was X or XY or XYZ. So that's a really good point that you want to point out. And then maybe call out, throughout the case study, what it was that you actually worked on. And when you actually, so like, let's say you were the UX researcher on the project, make sure that UX or that research portion of the case study is thorough. And make sure that is where, if that's where you want people to focus, if that's what you said you worked on, make sure that is amazing. It's detailed, it's carefully structured, it's carefully well thought out. You just really want to make sure that you are really calling attention to the part that you played. Of course, it's important to show the rest of the process to let people know that, hey, I was a part of this, as well for the duration. But you really want to make sure, like, if you're working on a team, that you absolutely call out where you, really, where you shine in that case study. That's a really good point.
Yeah, cool. Awesome.
Again, that goes to the how you solve it. Really make sure that you're detailed there. Show any artifacts that you worked on. So again, these are artifacts, things like your storyboarding, any mapping, anything that you did, even like I said, if you took a walk and you got inspiration from, whatever, and you took photos of that, like show the process. People like people who can think outside of the box. There are different techniques that we learn, but don't just stick to those. Everybody finds inspiration in other places. Maybe you were on Twitter and you did a search for something, and then you saw all these tweets and you use that as research. Like, show that. Show, whatever your process is, show that.
Yeah, awesome.
And then also you want to make sure that you showcase your final, whatever your final product is, whether that's a UI for maybe like a watch or a phone, or maybe it's a physical product. Make sure that you show that in a very compelling way. Please make sure that your whatever your imagery is that you're showing is a high resolution. I see so many portfolios where the photos are at low resolution. Like, please, like, these are the details again that, when I mentioned it's all in the details. Make sure that you are showing everything in the best way possible, because again, if you submit something, I'm going to assume as the hiring manager that this is what you thought was okay to submit, and this is what you're going to think is okay to do at said company. So please just make sure that you kind of just really go back and make sure, like, is this something that I would say, oh wow, that you would be taken aback by? So just some things to remember.
Yeah, very good points.
So experience. I love this. We're just going to jump right into experience. What is it? Experience is any work that you have completed in the fields of UX research, UI design, strategy, etc. As an aspiring UX designer, this experience usually comes with something that you can package in a way to add to your portfolio or your case study. So why I want to talk about experience, like I mentioned earlier, experience, and really no matter what the field is, it's something that really kind of trips a lot of us up, because a lot of times they'll say like, okay, junior designer, we want 2-3 years of experience. And then you're left as the new person like, well, how am I supposed to get experience if I've never had a job before? UX and design is a very interesting field because, and tech in general, because you can literally be home and get experience. Let's see if we talk about this. Yeah. Where can you get experience? Coursework. Are you taking a UX course that is going to take you through, several projects, that is going to give you briefs, that is going to give you feedback, that is going to give you, the opportunity to work with others, to maybe get some feedback there and also see how other people are working. Side projects. There are a ton of freelance websites where you can go on and maybe take on side projects. Don't be afraid to reach out to someone who has maybe a company, or maybe you don't even have to reach out to that person. Maybe that's too much pressure for you. If you have a friend, we all have friends that have companies. So everyone has a business. Take what you know of that business. Maybe you see that maybe just have a conversation with them. Say, hey, a friend who has a shoe line or a beauty line, or whatever it is, what problems are you having in your business right now? And they'll say, man, I really am having trouble with my website. People I look on my analytics, and I see that people are coming to the website, but they're not shopping. They're coming to the website and they're maybe they're putting things in their cart, but they're not actually checking out. Like really, and just listen to what they say. People will tell you, because people love to talk about their businesses. People will tell you where they're struggling. And those are really good things that you can actually use as problems and say, okay, take those problems and use that as a direction for a project. Maybe you show it to them, maybe you don't. But those are real problems that you're going to be solving. And it also gets you out of your own head, right? Because sometimes when we tend to give ourselves projects, we're working against ourselves, versus if I ask my friend, like, hey, what problems are you having in your business? I have to think about their business and their customers and their product and the problems that they're having. And I think that's a really great way to really build up your portfolio, really build up your expertise. And when companies are hiring you, they are hiring you on a few things. Obviously, the work that you show that you can do, but they're also hiring you on like your tenacity and your grit and your willingness to solve problems. Like I will hire someone who is on their own off doing projects, trying to get better any day over someone who, just thinks that something should be given to them because, I did something, or I have 3 projects and, I'm done. Like always try to strive for more and try to get better. I'm not sure if you're going to say something there, Joe.
No, well, just really good advice, I think, in terms of just going to someone even though that you're not going to get necessarily paid for it, and like you said, you might not even show them what you've done. Just doing that work and building up that experience from home as well. Like you say, you haven't got to go out anywhere and or sign up to a course to do that. You can literally do that in your own time from people that you know. And I just think it's really good advice to do that. Yeah, really cool.
Yeah, definitely. So don't get tripped up by that experience word. I know, in a lot of fields, it might be a little bit more tough. But for designers, for for people in tech, like we can really create our own experiences. If you're a coder, work really hard to, develop different types of websites and different types of platforms and different types of features. Like, no one has to give you a job for you to do that, for you to show and say, hey, I've done these things.
Yeah.
Same thing with UX.
Awesome.
So if you have a lack of experience, what does this mean and how to get it? We talked about this a little bit already, but freelance projects and also pro bono work. So same thing, I kind of jumped ahead, but, maybe, the work with your friend, like, maybe they do need some work. Maybe their UI, maybe, the example that I gave, or maybe, someone is getting to the cart. So maybe they're landing on the website and then they are not maybe clicking around. There might be something in the UX, and there also might be something in the visual design. So maybe think about, those things as well. And maybe if they are adding products to the cart, but they're not checking out, that could be a design or it could be a functionality problem. So again, there are two ways that you can go about that. So you can, maybe share this with your friend. Maybe they use it. If they use it, that's even better, because now you actually have someone that is actually using something of yours. You can put that into your portfolio as well. But consider that all like pro bono work, like do it for free. Like, don't expect anything from anyone. I always say, like, use these experiences as like your experience is your payment. Until you get paid, like, your experience is your payment, and just really have fun with it. Really see it as, a way to grow. And, that's your compensation.
Yeah, completely agree. And I think that, like you see, I think it's good that people can now use platforms like LinkedIn. People can find, design managers or whatever it may be in certain companies, and just offer themselves and just network themselves. I think around, it's so easy now to connect with people, easier than it probably ever has been. And I think it's it's easy to do that now. I'm not saying it's easy, but it's easier to do that. If that makes sense at all.
Yeah, definitely. And I think I actually talk about mentorship a little bit at the end, but it's definitely really, really important, and something that, like you mentioned with LinkedIn, you really want to take advantage of. Something that, we can do with platforms like LinkedIn.
Yeah, completely agree.
Okay, so now I want to get into interviewing a little bit. So kind of skipping ahead from, what we've been talking about. But if you are someone, like I mentioned, who has been applying, has been interviewing, maybe you've never interviewed for a technical role before or a design role before, these are definitely different types of interviews. They're not your typical interview questions, and we'll get into that just a second. So what does a typical UX interview look like? There's a portfolio showcase usually at one point or another, where you are asked to maybe either run through something that you, maybe they'll say, like, run me through your favorite project, and why was that your favorite project? You may even come into the interview, this has happened to me before, and they'll have a project up and they'll say, yeah, I was really interested in this project, what you did here, can you tell me about it? So what I will say about that is, and I talk about this a lot in my course, you have to be ready with everything that you have in your portfolio. You have to know it forwards and backwards. You have to know not just the projects themselves, but the intricacies of the project. Because they may say, yeah, on that second project where you're talking about the environment, you had the artifact for the journey mapping. Tell me, why, person A ended up at, point Z. You have to be like, whoa. You have to be ready to do that, because people are again, like, they're interested in those details. They're interested in hearing your feedback and really trying to see, get a gauge of your knowledge around what you've done. So,
exactly, and I guess that takes us back to that point I mentioned earlier about disclosing what your part of that project actually was. Otherwise you will get found out in the interview.
Absolutely. That's a really good point. So I have seen that happen. So a lot of, especially like a lot of the in-person UX courses, they typically have people partner together. I, for that reason, do not do that in my course. Everyone, it's every man for themselves. For that reason, also because I want whatever you put into your portfolio, you did it. you
Yeah.
know. But if you are working with a team, which, you know, if you freelance, maybe, you know, one of your buddies is another UX designer, you guys collaborate, totally fine. But make sure that if you're going to put it in that case study, that you can talk about it. That's a really, really good point. Also, there are going to be a slew of interview questions, which we'll talk about. You might meet the team. This is also your time to interview the interviewers, which I would recommend if you're in any field. That's your time to ask them questions about the company, about, you know, maybe what you'll be doing, about who you'll be working under, about what kind of challenges they're seeing in the current you know, team that you'll be working on, or the company overall. So don't forget to do that. And there also could be an on or off-site design challenge, which is basically where they might give you a problem. It could be a current problem or a problem maybe that they've solved for already, but that they are currently working through. And they want you to actually solve that problem, and they'll give you all of the constraints around that. And so what I'll say about design challenges is that there are ways to prepare for them, for parts of them, right? Like, you're not going to know the exact question they're going to ask or whatever they're going to have you do, but you do want to be able to be very quick, and you want to be able to pivot, you know? So if, you know, maybe they're talking about you building out, maybe they're talking about you specifically focusing on the research, or maybe they're talking about you doing all of it. You really have to be, you know, able to kind of be, you know, able to bounce back and forth and kind of just quick on your toes, and whatever they're asking, you have to have the knowledge to be able to do it. And that all comes from practice, that comes from experience. So again, you know, maybe that project you worked on for your friend that they didn't know you worked on for them, maybe that really helped you because that was a real world experience. That was something outside of the projects that you may have given yourself to work on. So I just have two questions that I want to kind of run through, because I think they're really important. And I'll kind of touch on these really kind of quickly, but questions that come up in design interviews, they're posed like this: like, what is your typical workflow? And what I will say about these questions is that these are not questions that you can just kind of BS your way through. You have to know exactly what approach you took. You have to know what a workflow is. They're really asking about your process and your approach to problem solving. So they're really asking you at a very high level, what is your typical workflow? Because we all have kind of like a typical workflow, but then you can also give an example of when you applied this workflow, or maybe when you did a different workflow approach. You know, they really want to, again, make sure that you have a clear understanding of UX and kind of what that is, but also that you can kind of give examples to that as well.
Yeah, makes complete sense.
Yeah. And then, like I mentioned here, your goal is to take the interviewer on your journey to problem solving. And that's, you know, pretty much the best way that I can explain it. They want you to, you know, tell them at a very high level, you know, what exactly your process is. And another question, this is another one, and I picked these two because these are very common questions, and these are questions, again, that you cannot just kind of talk your way through. If if they say, how do you incorporate usability testing back into your work, you have to know what usability testing is. You have to have done it. You have to have done it multiple times. You also have to have done it and incorporated it back into your work, which is something that if you are learning about usability testing, that you are doing. And you have to, you know, explain maybe a time where you did this and then you had to test again. You know, that happens all the time as well. So, you know, really, again, explain your process. And then, like I mentioned here, you want to cherry pick the items that you want to include versus not include. Yeah, and then, like I mentioned, just always give an example of a time where you did this, and how you decided actually what you were going to incorporate back into your user testing. So after you tested, you got your results and you looked them over. How did you decide what you were actually going to fix versus what you thought maybe we don't need to fix? How did you make that decision? So you want to talk about that. But again, you can't talk about these things without having done them.
Yeah. Cool.
Okay, so I just have just a couple more slides here, but typically just a couple of things that I see that kind of hinder aspiring UX designers. And the next slide, if you think that this is you, just, you know, in your mind to yourself, just say that, you know, can you relate? If you can relate, let me know. If you're having, if you have little to no experience when first applying for jobs, if this is you, if they're asking for experience and you feel like, oh my God, I have no experience, say me to yourself. If you're trying to find the time to dedicate to UX while learning a full-time job, this is a very common thing that I see as well. If you are not knowing what should go into a UX portfolio, this is a very common thing. Also, imposter syndrome. So imposter syndrome, thinking that, maybe this field isn't for you because you're not smart enough, or you're not good enough, or you're not trained enough. That's something that definitely holds a lot of us back from doing things we want to do.
I've seen imposter syndrome that's come up a lot lately across sort of social media. Of course, we see it in design, but sort of, it's quite a common thing now across the board, really, imposter syndrome, and it's quite a hot topic at the moment, really. I think, especially like you say, within like the junior guys or aspiring designers. Sorry, then yeah, I guess it's an issue. I mean, what can we do to prevent that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So what I always say, and this is across the board. So if you are interested in speaking, if you are interested in learning a new craft, if you're interested in transitioning into a new field, what are the things that you can do to make sure you don't feel that way? Is practice.
Yeah.
When I first started speaking, I was not as confident as I feel like I am now. But what helped me? What helped me was doing it. And what also helped me was knowing what I'm talking about. How do I know what I'm talking about? I do more work with working with aspiring UX designers. It's the same thing. If you feel like, I'm not really sure how to break into this field, it looks like it's too hard, it's too intimidating. Practice your UX methods. Maybe you need to take a course. Maybe it's something that maybe you need the guided, just like I did. Maybe you need the guided learning and the structured learning. Think about how you learn best. Actually doing it is the best way to overcome it. Maybe you're finding a mentor. Maybe you're actually talking. Maybe you're finding another person who is interested in UX, and you guys are having weekly chats about how you're finding the field, becoming more comfortable with it. Going to things like this, where you're hearing more people talk about it, you hear more buzzwords, you hear more like, okay, I've heard usability testing a few times now, I need to go find out what it is. So that way, maybe you go to a meetup and someone says, hey, have you done any user testing? And you're like, I know what that is. And yes, I have, because I knew what it was and I actually went to go do it. Yeah. Just really immersing yourself in it is the best way to overcome imposter syndrome.
Okay, cool. Thank you for that.
And then also, lastly, not knowing what part of UX is for you. So again, maybe you're not sure if user research is for you, or maybe you're not sure if the strategy is for you, or maybe you're not sure if you're better at the actual how it looks part, the UI. Maybe you want to do all of it. I think these things all, kind of hold people back. And so I like the slide because I think that, it shows that, you're not alone. These are things that I hear all the time. So yeah. So again, kind of just to wrap up a little bit, where can you get experience? A UX course, again, think about how you learn best. Do you learn best in a structured environment where there's a syllabus and you know that, okay, on this day I'm going to start and on this day I'm going to end, and this is what the expected outcome is? Or is it partnering with other aspiring UX designers and kind of going at projects and going at the learning process that way? There are a ton of different ways. I see a lot of people, kind of maybe they're starting off kind of researching on their own, and then they get to a point where they feel like, okay, now I'm ready for a course, or now I'm ready to actually partner with another designer. Okay, and so lastly, just to kind of recap, I always say, start here if you are trying to figure out, how do I get started? I always say, get familiar with good design. Good design is all around us. It's not just in digital products. So good design is in things like, our Alexas or our Google Homes. How does that work? Really start thinking outside of a digital kind of product, like a house, like a screen. Good design is everywhere. How is a mug constructed? Maybe you have a mug that's shaped differently and you really like that shape because it allows you to do whatever. It's more functional. So really start calling out good design when you see it. Understand the UX process. It's a long and detailed process, but it's going to be your guidance to what leads you to success. So really starting there and understanding that to really actually help you solve problems. And then lastly, finding a coach and a mentor, Joe, like you said, I think this is critical. Feedback is critical. And then also coaches give you not only feedback, but they're also a trustworthy place for you to share your work. A lot of times we don't want to share the things that we've done because maybe we think it's not that good, but finding someone that you can share with and they can actually critique it is the best way to get better.
Yeah, I completely agree. And there's a lot of senior designers out there that are willing to do that, take an aspiring designer under their wing, if you like. I know there's loads of people out there that are willing to do that. Cool.
Absolutely, and that's the key. You want to get that feedback. That's the way that we get better. So that was what I had for today. Definitely want you guys to kind of stay in touch here. If you want to take a screenshot of this, this is where you can find me. I'm always talking about UX and how to get better and doing lives where we talk about, whatever. Last week we talked about 5 ways to enhance your portfolio. So if you're looking for maybe those more detailed kind of subjects, definitely stay in touch. And again, thank you so much for having me.
Cool. Thank you very much for that. Went on a little bit longer than we thought. Probably my fault for keeping on interrupting you, but we have had a few questions come in. We've got about just under 5 minutes to rattle through them. So let's take a look here. So which prototyping software would you recommend I should learn? I guess that's from someone who's just starting out. They don't know what to learn. I don't know, a bit of Sketch, InVision maybe. What would you recommend? Looking at what the current trends are and then sort of working that way, I guess?
Yeah, definitely. So I would recommend Figma. That's Figma. F is in Frank. Figma is a really great tool. It's a newer tool, but it is a really robust tool. They are doing updates and getting better all the time. And companies like Twitter, Caterpillar, Facebook, everyone is using Figma. It really combines the best of like Sketch and InVision, and it really puts them all together. So I would definitely say start with a tool like Figma, and it's also free.
Oh, there you go. That's even better then. Do you suggest making a website, or is PDF fine? I think, again, from my point of view, going on what you mentioned earlier, Ashley, that it's the effort that you put into it, I think, is then obviously received by the hiring manager or whoever's looking at it. So obviously, I think a website is definitely the way to go.
Yeah, definitely. So 2 quick points on this. So you definitely want to have both. I would say a website is something definitely that you would attach to like an application. But I like PDFs because, and I've gotten good feedback on PDFs because when you're actually in interviews, let's say you go interview for Twitter, you can actually customize your PDF for Twitter. You can use Twitter branding, you can do things like that, and you can actually include parts of your case study, parts of your portfolio, kind of the parts that you actually want to talk about, if they allow you to do kind of like that portfolio PDF kind of run through. So it's just a way to kind of really personalize the interview that way. So definitely want to have the first one though, the website.
Yeah, okay, cool. A few more questions. So we've got questions from LinkedIn here. How would you recommend go about finding a mentor?
Yeah, definitely. So I definitely think that you want to make sure that you are reaching out to people. I want to, if you go the LinkedIn route, make sure that you show interest in that person. Maybe you guys went to the same school, or maybe you're interested in where they did their UX education, and really take interest in them as a person first, and actually be very direct about what you want. Is it that you want someone you can get feedback from? Is it somebody that you want to pick their brain? And when you say pick their brain, make sure that you actually maybe don't use those words, but actually have very specific questions that you want to know, and say, hey, I'm just starting out. Do you mind if I shoot you over a few questions every, couple times, maybe a month? I send you, an email with some questions. I'm just looking for some feedback. So be very direct in the feedback you want.
Yeah, cool. Good answer. Thank you. We've got a few more here. Might have time just to squeeze them in. Another question from LinkedIn here. I use low resolution pics on my portfolio due to NDAs. What would you suggest when having projects under NDA?
Yeah, so when you have a project under NDA, you always want to make sure that you lock it with a passcode. Or, well, you have to figure out if you can show it or not. If you
Yeah.
can't show it, then you can't show it. Some employers will allow you to lock it. So if you say, hey, I would like to use this for my portfolio, but do you mind if I lock it? And only people who are actually interested can see it. So if a hiring manager says, hey, we'd love to see this project. So only a few people actually end up seeing it.
Yeah, okay, cool. So basically, you suggest just speaking to the business you're working for or done the work for and see if you can go about it that way, yeah?
Yep.
Cool. And last question, I think we might have time. We're going like 1 minute over, but I think we've
Yeah.
got it. As a design professional, you're always designing someone else's product. Should I
Mhm.
work on developing a personal design style? I guess that's something you touched on earlier, I think, in terms of your own sort of personal brand.
Yeah, definitely. So you do want to make sure that you develop your personal design style. You will, working for maybe a large company, you will have a design system, which is basically the components and the style is already done for you. And so your job is to actually figure out how to use those components in a way that makes sense. So that part could be always done for you. But yes, you do want to make sure that you develop a personal brand. And everyone has their own personal brand, maybe without even thinking about it. But once you start working on your own projects, that personal design style will come out naturally. But you do want to be able to kind of speak to it, like maybe it's bold, and maybe if someone asks you how you describe it, you want to make sure that you can point to specific ways of how you describe it.
Yeah, cool. Good answer. Awesome. Yeah, that's all we've got time for, Ashley. Again, I really, really appreciate you joining us. That was really cool.
Oh,
Very informative. I've learned a lot as well myself. And I'm sure everyone that's watching has. This will be available to watch back the replay on our YouTube channel, Always Connect, on this same link as well if you want to come back and watch it. And there's a few things going on actually over the next few weeks. We're quite busy in terms of events, so take a look at our meetup page or my LinkedIn page or Orbis page. You'll find it all everywhere. But yeah, so Ashley, thank you very much for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your week, and
thank you so much. And if there are any questions, I can answer them in LinkedIn. If you want to leave them in the chat box, I can do that as well on LinkedIn.
yeah, perfect, cool. Well, I'll take you in that video,
Perfect.
Ashley, and hopefully we can. Yeah, hopefully we'll get around to all of them. So yeah, thanks for your time. Thanks for joining us, guys. Enjoy the rest of the week, and I'll see you soon. Cheers, Ashley.
Awesome. Thank you guys. Bye.
Cheers, bye.